So everyone, as you come in, please feel free to use the chat and tell us your name, your organization, and where you are calling in from in the world. Where in the world are you calling in from? Please use the chat. Oh, okay. Nombulelo, it says the chat is disabled. Do you mind enabling the chat? Thank you, Andrea and anonymous attendee. Give us a second to make that work. Thank you so much for joining us. There we go. Welcome, everyone. Oh, amazing. Got people from all over. Stockholm, Boston, Cambridge, Cape Town, Singapore. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Just give it another minute before we kick off. Welcome. Hi, everyone. And I just need somebody in the chat to let me know if they are able to see the slide presentation on the left, on the right, and me and Adam on the other side. Yes, great, thank you. I see a yes. Thank you, Paul, and everyone else. Fantastic. Hello from London. Wonderful to see some of our partners in the chat as well. So let me introduce myself and we can get going. Whoever joins us will join us when the train is firmly on its way. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mpinane Senkhane. I am a senior consultant at Rios Partners, and I have the exciting honor to be your host for the next 90 minutes. And in some ways, I think of that as I have the honor of being the obstacle remover, and I'm going to be very much stewarding the conversation with Adam. And I really want to embrace your own wisdom and your comments. So I will be certainly bringing in your voice here. It is a great pleasure to welcome you today to this event. It's hosted by Rios Partners, and it's a really special occasion for us at Rios, and I think hopefully for you too, as Rios Partners' director, Adam Kahane, who's here with me. He launches his new book called Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems. So for anyone that's just joining us, please put your name and where you're calling from in the chat. The chat function and the question and answer function, they're going to remain open. And I really encourage you to use them. This conversation is 90 minutes long, and I really want to be able to bring in your voice as we go. And after I've gotten started with some questions of my own for Adam, we'll move over to him responding to your questions, your insights, your own reflections and comments. And my amazing colleagues will help me field and pose your questions. You can't see them, but I am joined by Sam Mabaso. She's going to be replying to some of the comments in the chat and in the Q&A. And our tech facilitator, Nombulelo Manyana, is also here. And she's going to be helping us move from slide to deck to poll. So I certainly hope that this conversation is enriching for all of you and also gives you a good enough snapshot of what this book is about. And I'm optimistic that there'll be many opportunities for many of us to engage with Adam beyond this initial book launch around his insights. Now, I do not want to take for granted that some of you will be more familiar with Adam and some of you may not be familiar with Rios Partners, or some are more familiar with Rios Partners, but not so much Adam. So I'll start by saying a little bit about Rios Partners. So for those of you who don't know, RIOS is an international social enterprise that is helping people move forward on their tough challenges across the world. We're a global team of adaptive innovators, creative problem solvers, a diverse team of facilitators of societal transformation. And I think we're all sort of together at RIOS trying to strive to make the world a better place. And we especially try to do this through enhanced multi-stakeholder collaboration. And we operate globally, right? And locally with offices in Johannesburg, this is where I'm calling from, Cambridge in Massachusetts, Geneva, London, Montreal, and Sao Paulo. And we work on a lot of different issues, namely economic inclusion, education, energy, climate, equity, natural resources, food, land, peace, social inequality, you name it. And many of these systems that we are actually observing as they start to fall apart and fall short. So in a world where we're sort of trying to grapple with interconnected challenges like climate change and social inequality and this and that, we need transformative approaches that help address root causes, not just symptoms. So the question that I think we're always asking ourselves at RIOS, and I imagine everyone on this call, is saying, how can we contribute to creating a better world? So I'm delighted to introduce to you, for those of you who are less familiar with Adam, he's a renowned facilitator. He's director at RIOS Partners based in Montreal. But today, Adam is calling in from Pringle Bay in the Western Cape of South Africa. Adam is a best-selling author. He's a leading architect and organizer of collaboration processes. And he's worked in more than 50 countries in every part of the world, really, with executives, politicians, artists, clergies, civil society, actors, trade unions, you name it. And I think, Adam, your work has helped leaders across the globe, from warring factions in Colombia to corporate innovators. You've helped people really collaborate on solving complex problems. Adam is the author of multiple bestsellers, including Collaborating with the Enemy, Power and Love, and Facilitating Breakthrough, which is recently listed in Session Lab's 10 most recommended facilitation books, which is really exciting, Adam, to see that that book is still making waves today. Solving Tough Problems, as well as Transformative Scenario Planning. Those are Adam's books. These books are still available. So if you're interested in purchasing any of these books or interested in hearing a little bit more about these books, please visit the RIOS Partners website, because we have links to where you can get these books. Now, back to Adam. Today, however, we've got all these other books, but today, however, I'm really excited because I get to introduce to you Adam's latest offering, Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems, the Catalytic Power of Radical Engagement, which aims to provide a powerful answer on how systems transformers may think about tackling the nexus of challenges we face in the world. The book has been described as a manifesto for world changes, which is really exciting. And it draws on Adam's decades of experience working with people from all walks of life. And, I've had the opportunity to look at the book, to have a look at the book, and it really distills 7 potent habits that enable ordinary citizens to become extraordinary agents of transformation. Like I said, I've had the pleasure of reading the advanced draft of the book, and Adam has really been able to, through very vivid stories of profound change, he's been able to show and demonstrate in this book how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary impact. Adam, that was a mouthful. Hello. And
Hi.
thank you for joining us. I had to tick all my boxes there. I must tell you, Adam, I've really been looking forward to this conversation. How are
Yes,
you?
so am I. I'm fine. I'm happy to finally be launching the book, and I'm also enjoying looking at the chat and seeing both personal friends and lots of people who contributed to the book. So thank you to everybody.
Amazing. So before we kick off our conversation with Adam, I'd like to hear from the audience or people who are here as attendees. So before you can dive into the habits, I want to hear from everyone here which habits feel more familiar and which feel more challenging to execute. So Nombulelo is going to put up a slide deck with all 7 habits, not saying much about them, just the titles and a little blurb. And without yet hearing from Adam as he unpacks these habits, I want to know from you through a poll I'm going to put up shortly, which of these habits feels most familiar? So before we run the poll, just have a quick look at the 7 habits. Yes, you haven't been able to get the book yet because the book the book has not been launched yet, but it is available for pre-order. And I know Sam will put those details in the chat. So we've got 7 habits. Acting responsibly, which says not just doing what is expected of us, nor just whatever we like. 2 is relating in 3 dimensions, engaging with others as fellow actors, parties, and kin, not just in 1 or 2 dimensions that we're most comfortable with. 3 is looking for what's unseen. 4 is working with cracks. 5 is experimenting a way forward. 6 is collaborating with unlike others. And 7 is persevering and resting. And I know I can see all of you are starting to answer in the chat, but I want to run the poll. So Nombulelo, if you could just pop up the first question and we could be able to distill what's coming out. So you should have seen something pop up and I think you'll be able to vote. Oh, wow. I'm delighted to see 261 people here today. This is a single choice. So choose one that feels most familiar. And I know there might be a second one, but choose one that feels most familiar. Yes. All right. That's interesting. I do find that interesting because the results are, yeah, I find the results fascinating.
I don't see them yet.
I'm going to show them to you now. Nombulelo, will you
Okay.
present the results? I know 219 people have. Yeah. Can you see the results now?
Yep.
So we had 219 people respond, and looking for what's unseen seems to be leading on what feels most familiar, and relating in 3 dimensions, not so much, and working with cracks, not so much. Okay, let's get with the second poll, which says, at first glance, so I'm going to share another poll with you now. Nombulelo, let's move to the second poll. And the second poll is exactly the opposite. Which of these feel less familiar or more challenging if you have to implement them? So which of these feel least familiar to you or the more challenging to implement? And people are voting. There are lots of votes. Yes, I know. So Adam, as you can see, it's popping up in the chat that some of these, it's unclear what they mean. And actually, this is why I wanted to run the polls before Adam tells us what they mean. Because at first glance, we can also make meaning, and lots of words mean different things to us. So I thought it might be interesting to reflect on what we first see before Adam tells us what he really meant by all of this. Okay. I've got 208 votes. I'm going to ask Nombulelo to share the poll so you can see. So yeah, Adam, what feels least familiar? There's pretty much a spread of what feels least familiar. Collaborating with unlike others, relating in 3 dimensions feels least familiar. Thank you, Nombulelo. You can take that down. Thank you for participating and indulging me in that. Adam, what did you think of those results?
Well, this is the first time I present the book to a big group, so I'm interested in what makes sense and doesn't make sense. Uh, yeah, um, I guess some of them that were familiar to you might feel most straightforward, acting responsibly. The words are straightforward, although um, uh, uh, as I'll present later, I think it's deeply challenging. What does that mean? And working with cracks, the phrasing is not familiar, although many of you picked up that as a Montrealer, of course, I had to reference Leonard Cohen, so you got the in joke. But that that notion that system transformation is about working with cracks was new to me. So I'm not surprised that it's also new to many of you. So those are a couple of observations.
Great. Yeah, I will say that it's been very interesting to see how we're also all sort of understanding the habits. And I'm excited to learn more about what you actually meant. But maybe a good place to start is you we haven't seen anything written from you in maybe 4 years now. So I want to ask you why this book and why now?
Yeah, only 4 years. Geez, I've really been slacking off. I've written a book for 4 years. Uh, Sorry about that.
Work harder.
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. There's two ways to answer it. When I published my previous book, which was Facilitating Breakthrough, which was 4 years ago in September 2021, I had this idea of doing the launch event, the equivalent of what we're doing now, or launching it through three interviews with people I admired a lot, who by a stretch could be called people who facilitate breakthrough. And so I thought of people I'd worked with in the past or who I knew. And so I did 3 half-hour interviews with Cristiana Figueres, who is the Costa Rican diplomat who negotiated the Paris Accords, with Juan Manuel Santos, who a Colombian was president and got a Nobel Peace Prize, and I had worked with him over the years, and with Trevor Manuel, who is a well-known South African politician, now businessman, who I had met when I first started this work in South Africa in 1991. And I thought, well, we're going to talk about my book. They're going to basically say how great it is and how it fits exactly with their experience. And it wasn't at all like that. They were all three actually in different ways. I wouldn't say disconcerting, but surprising encounters, and especially the one with Trevor Manuel, who's, I mean, I wouldn't say we're close friends, but I've known him for a long time. He was a member of the Montfleur team, which was my first experience with this kind of work. And in a way, it was a terrible interview in the sense that I kept trying to get him to agree with what I'd written in that book, and he kept explaining how he saw things, which was completely different. And so it was uh, yeah, a confusing conversation. And as soon as it was over, it was only half an hour, I got lots of messages from Rio's colleagues telling me I really shouldn't quit my day job. I was a terrible interviewer. So it was I mean, when something doesn't go as I expect it to, I always take that as a sign of, I wonder what I'm missing here. And for those of you who've read my previous books, they're all based on stuff that doesn't make sense to me, or that failed, or that was confusing or disconcerting. So I I really wondered what was I missing, that or what was Trevor seeing that I wasn't seeing? And so that's the uh, and so what I realized was that uh, the way what Trevor had done in South Africa in the years prior to the first democratic elections in 1994, he'd been a very well-known activist, an ANC National Executive Committee member. The way he described what he'd actually done day to day was completely different from how I was thinking about system transformation. And so I wanted to try to understand. I realized I don't really understand what it takes day to day. I have some understanding, but as an observer and facilitator, not as a protagonist. And in different ways, the other two interviews had the same raised the same question. So that's the first answer, which is I started to wonder, well, I wonder what this takes day to day or in practice, not as a facilitator, but as a change agent. So that's one very specific answer. And I started this book, which is the one we're launching today, shortly after. And you'll see when you look at the book that those three interviews are the foundation for the book, especially the one with Trevor that I'll come back to in a few minutes. The second answer is that it's not new, but it was becoming more and more clear to me that we live in systems, and many systems are not working for many people. And so many people, certainly many of the people I talk to, are wondering, how can we change? How can I change not just what I'm doing or what's happening in my organization or my community, but how can we affect systemic change? And so, and I've been thinking about this all day today because, of course, systems do change, and we're witnessing, well, what for me is a dramatic change in many systems, international systems, as a result, or with the new American administration. So I guess all I would say about that is there are ways to transform systems degeneratively with violence, with force, with bullying, with lying, with cheating. This is not a book about that. Um, this is a book about how do we change systems generatively, meaning in the direction of greater connection, agency, and justice. And I'm coming to the end of my answer to your question, which is that obviously that's not something that any individual does. It's a collective activity. And yet the question is, what are the people who are part of that collective need to focus on, not every once in a while, not occasionally, but on a day-to-day basis? So that question, so the book ended up being an exploration as provoked by those first three interviews, especially the one with Trevor Manuel, an exploration of the question, in order to transform systems, what everyday habits are required of each of us. And that's the adventure I went on, and that's what produced the book.
And when you say us, who's this book for?
Well, the book is for anybody who sees themselves as trying to do that, make a contribution to transforming systems, whether or not they use that particular language, to changing how things work in the world from wherever they are, whether they're an activist or a business person or a parent or a philanthropist or a government official. So another way to answer that question is my previous books were much more directed at professionals doing this kind of work, especially facilitating breakthrough, the previous book, but transformative scenario planning, which is in a way quite about a particular methodology. And so I was trying to write a book that could be useful to everybody who, in whatever way, is trying to make a contribution to transforming systems. And one of the earliest conclusions I came to, it's I think it's obvious, but still it needs to be saying, it needs to be said, there isn't just one thing to do. There isn't just one way to make an impact. There isn't just one formula, or if everybody just ought to do this or that. I don't believe that's true at all. That's one of my conclusions from my first experience, the one in South Africa, is that it was many people doing many things um, diplomatically and in communities and in companies and for that matter on the battlefield that affected the 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 transformation of the system. So so in that sense, this is the of all of my books, this is the one that is most is about what are the things any of us can do that underlie specific actions or strategies or tactics that we might choose. It doesn't really talk about tactics. It doesn't really talk about, a particular kind of actor. It really, we chose the title. It's a very ordinary title, but the good thing about the title is that it explains exactly what the book's about: everyday habits for transforming systems.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm interested, Adam, about how you actually wrote the book and what's the process you undertook and how long did it take and what kind of process did you dive into as you wrote this book?
Yeah. So, uh, thanks for the question. It's was fun for me, and in a in a certain way, it was one of the fun books I read. Sorry, that I've written, and I think the reason is because of that first um, encounter with Trevor. I realized that unlike my other books, this was going to be a book about what other people knew rather than what I knew. So,
Mm,
I mean, I'm in the book, and some of my experiences and some of my learnings are in the book, but it's much more about uh, what do what do what do people who understand this more than I do, how do they understand it? And so uh, the main way I wrote the book, or there are two big things I did. First of all, I talked to a lot of people who I'd worked with over the years, not just the three I've mentioned, but another, I don't know, 30 or 40, who I thought had in their own way been able to make a difference on the systems they're working on. People working on very different things: rural development in Thailand, housing in the United States, criminal justice reform, climate change, indigenous rights, racism, uh, lots of different fields. So I did that, and at the same time, I extended further something I have done with previous books, which is invite people to join what I call a book creating club. And about 300 people did and participate actively. So we had many Zoom calls and Google Docs amongst in that book club. And um, at first it was very confusing because if you ask people, as I did on the Zoom calls and in the interviews, what do you do on an everyday basis that you think is part of uh, um, transforming systems? You get all kinds of different answers. And so I had pages and pages of lists about what people thought.
mm,
And the clue was, and I'm just picking up the book now because I want to read you one paragraph. The clue
mm.
was actually in the original. Sorry, it is.
Adam is with his family in Pringle Bay.
Yeah, sorry, lots going on in this household. Um, the clue actually was in the Trevor Manuel interview. Um, in the middle of the interview, he said the following. I'm gonna just read you this. this passage, because when I went back to it, he had given me what turns out to be the main idea in the book.
Mm.
He was talking about what he did in the period leading up to the constitutional settlement and democratic elections in South Africa. He said, what we needed to do was to persuade a diversity of institutions and views. In one morning, I would be with a group of business leaders in an affluent area, and in the afternoon at the university campus with some very radical students, and in the evening in a very poor community. We need to persuade everybody the struggle needed to find a conclusion. Bear in mind that there were very deep and gaping scars then still. Many of us had been to prison, many of us had been in exile, many had lost friends and associates. All that we and I could do was to try to persuade people that we had one shot at this, and that persuasion created the basis for the absence of significant resistance. That was kind of the day job. The night job was to work with other groupings in the African National Congress to try to define and shape what the shape and form of South Africa would be. Um,
Mm.
so what? So to end, so where I ended up from all of this, the interviews, the Zoom calls, going back to what Trevor said and others, is the core idea in the book, which is referenced in the subtitle, which is a particular way of engaging that underlies all seven of the habits. And again, I'll just read you two paragraphs. Radical engagement refers to the day in, day out practice of intentionally and consciously colliding, connecting, communicating, confronting, competing, and collaborating with people from different parts and levels of the system at the cracks, working together with them to transform that system. Radical engagement is the simple but not easy activity of meeting others fully. And then here's the key paragraph. Radical engagement with the system doesn't mean participating in that system distractedly resigned, knowing it all, hierarchically at arm's length, with arms crossed superficially, impatiently, saying take it or leave it. It means taking part in it alertly, with hope and curiosity, horizontally, leaning forward, hands on, digging deep, persisting, and above all, reciprocally and relationally. So that's the big idea in the book, is that there is this particular approach. And in those paragraphs, I really, see it as sitting back like this versus leaning forward like this.
Mm.
And that's the core idea that underlies the seven specific habits.
Someone in the chat just said, that's intimidating as hell, Adam. Okay.
Well,
That's really helpful, Adam, because and it's really significantly powerful to understand what the ethos or what the message, of the book is. And I want to start to talk about the habits themselves, because as you saw in the chat earlier, people we're all grappling to understand what do these mean, What do these actually mean? So I want to start with the first one, and let's work with them sequentially. And Nombulelo, you're going to put up the first slide. And folks, bear with us. There's a lot of me and Adam talking right now, but there'll be a lot of space for your questions to be answered. And my lovely team is like working furiously to make sure that we get to all your questions. Adam, acting responsibly. What do you mean by this, and why? And what does it look like in our global context? And maybe can you share a bit of an example of what this might look like when you look at our context and our global social political environment? What does it mean to act responsibly, especially when others are not?
yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be brief because I think we want to touch on all seven of them. And I'm not going to read through the whole book, but let me try to give at least some clue. And some parts of this book were things that I've known for a long time, or I've written and understand relatively well. My own version of that poll, for example, I've written a lot before about experimenting a way forward, about collaborating with unlike others. looking for what's unseen. These are things that I'm relatively comfortable with. I've been doing for a long time. I thought I understood well. And there are several things in the book that I really hadn't thought about much before, but whether or not I'd thought about them before, they were really coming through clearly in my conversations with these people I interviewed, who, as I said, uh, understood this better than I do. And in particular, in a way, the one that's hardest for me or least straightforward for me is the first one, acting responsibly. And somebody once told me that in a book or in a sentence, sometimes you put the most powerful idea at the end, which is what I was intending to do. But my very brilliant editor, Steve Piersante, and my granddaughter, Siobhan Wilkinson, who created all of these drawings, told me that's wrong, and I had to start with this one. So this is habit one, and so you see the drawings of the elephants. Each of the habits is illustrated by Siobhan. Um, I'm very happy about that. Uh, and um, so I'll explain what it means, but it doesn't have a straightforward, it doesn't have an easy answer. And when you say, well, what does acting responsibly mean in our current context? The clearest I've been able to put it is that this is more of it's not so much a recipe as a riddle. So I think the value of habit one is to ask yourself, what is acting responsibly like now? What does it mean to me now? And the idea underneath it is that things are the way they are because people are doing what they're doing, and that radical engagement starts with, sorry, I'm looking off to the side because I'm reading that part of the text. Radical engagement starts with acknowledging where we are, accepting and taking responsibility for our roles, not just doing what is expected of us or whatever we like. We become part of the solution by becoming aware of how we're part of the problem and acting accordingly. And the story in this chapter of the book is of a First Nations medical doctor uh, named Marcia Anderson, who uh, works at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. I thought I saw somebody from Winnipeg on this webinar, my father's hometown. So very happy to see a Winnipegger. And in the interview with Marcia, she said at a certain point in the interview, this is all my relations view. And as I guess some of you know, and some of you don't, the phrase all my relations is a very commonly used phrase in many First Nations in Canada and the United States. And she explains in the book what she means by that, and I elaborate help my understanding of it. But it has very much to do with this idea of what must I do given that I am not on my own, which is closer to my own upbringing, an atomized individual, but I am in relationship, and in the case of that phrase, in my all my relations refers not just to my immediate family, but to other humans and non-human beings. So yeah, so I won't go further than that, but just to say that the habit of acting responsibly is to ask, what is my role in what's going on now? What responsibility is implied by that? And what actions are, yeah, are the responsible ones to take? And like all of these, this is a matter of judgment, not prescription, but this one more than any of the others.
Mm. Mm. Fantastic. I'm going to move to the second habit, which for me is actually the most mystifying in some ways because I didn't understand it at all when I first read it. And actually, I saw in the chat that some people also said, what does this mean? So relating in three dimensions. It's challenging for me to understand what you mean. So maybe let's start with what are the three dimensions and why is
Yeah.
this important?
Okay. Well, yesterday I got an email from one of the philosophers I admire most. I think he's on the call, Akanimo Akpan, and he thanked me for habit two. So that just made my day because it is the most abstract of all of them, but is relates to something I've been trying to understand for a long time, and I've had many conversations with
Mm.
Akanimo about it. So I'm very pleased that at least he and I are now on the same page. Um, so I'll answer it. You can think about it in two ways. Uh, it refers to relating to people as fellow actors. So you and I, for example, Mpinane, are at the moment, um, we're playing two roles or you and I and everybody else on this call are playing different roles in this thing we're doing right now, this webinar. So that's the perspective of an actor. We're also
Mm.
playing, uh, and and sometimes or often people who talk about systems change only focus on that. Okay, the system's doing this. What are different people doing? That is, and let's just think about, what role are we all playing and what actions are we taking and how is it producing the results of the system? The second perspective says, yes, well, that's true. But there's a second thing that's true is that we're parties, like parties in an agreement or parties in a lawsuit or parties in the conference of the parties, a COP. The the climate change COP is a conference of parties. Meaning we're individuals or entities that have our own interests. And so uh, and and that's also true and has to be acknowledged. Everybody on this call is something they're trying to do. I'm trying to get the word out about my book. Um, uh, you're, I won't speak to what you're trying to do, but I guess everybody on this call has something they're trying to do. In addition to being actors. So that's what I call parties. And thirdly, is this perspective that we're kin. That's the reference to all my relations, that quite aside from being part of a larger whole, quite aside from being people who each have this thing they're trying to do, or we're also related. And so the other way to state the three perspectives is that we are each that there is a way in which we're part of something whole. There's a way in which we're all whole in ourselves, and there's a way in which we're related. And for those of you who've been reading, as I try over and over to express this clearly, this is love, power, and justice. And so the argument in this chapter is to engage radically means we have to uh, relate with others in all three dimensions, as actors playing role in the system, as parties with our own interests, and as entangled kin, not just in the one or two ways we're most comfortable with. So that's the idea of the second habit.
And I guess it actually is closely related to habit three, which covers, looking at what's unseen. And I think many would agree that it's getting increasingly difficult to seek out and learn with people located at other positions in a system. Do you want to say more about habit three?
Well, habit three is the one I guess professionally I'm most familiar with because for a long time I did scenario work, and that's about what's going on in the system and how can we see it from other perspectives. And the great discovery at Montfleur 34 years ago was we can see more if we work with people who are located in and have different perspectives on the system. Um, uh, so I'm not sure it's more difficult than it was, but if we, I guess the opposite is thinking we know everything and we can see everything from where we are, and nobody else's position or perspective matters. And the starting point for habit three is a system cannot be grasped from any single perspective or position. And that's a photograph, or that's a drawing rather of a stick insect that you can't. It's hard to see. I actually was on a hike yesterday and I saw one in real life, IRL, and I somebody pointed out to me there's a stick insect on that tree branch, and I couldn't see it. So it's about talking with people and going to places that enable you to see what you're not seeing
Mm.
in order to understand better what's really going on.
No, Milelo, please put up the slides so people can see them.
Okay. You can leave them up, Boletta, while we're
Yeah.
talking.
Fantastic. Habit four is my favorite, and I think a lot of people here are equally curious to understand and unpack and understand from you what working with cracks actually means. And it's probably the most illuminating habit for me because the framing is so helpful and it resonates so much in our world today. So what do you mean by working with cracks? And can you give me an example or an anecdote about what that might look like? There's a question in the chat I saw from Marie earlier that says, can you tell me more about the cracks? Do you have
Yeah,
examples? How do we identify them?
yeah. So it's also my favorite in the sense that I'd never thought of it this way, and uh, I don't think it's more important than the others, but it's it's novel, at least for me. And so I'll read again the one paragraph that describes this. It says systems are structured to keep producing the behaviors and results they're producing, and therefore often seem solid and unchangeable, but they're not. They're built and they collapse, they crack and are cracked, which opens up new possibilities that some people find frightening and others find helpful. Radical engagement involves looking for, moving towards, and working with these cracks, not ignoring or shying away from them. And um, and so there's two ideas here, or two things worth saying about it. So I'll just spend a few more minutes on this. Um, the first is that it's easy from a high altitude to, or let me say, it's easy to slip into the idea that this is just the way things have always been and will always be, and there's nothing that can change them. And so either we have to just blow the whole thing up, hit it with a sledgehammer, or there's nothing to be done. And the cracks idea is, well, actually, that's not true. If you look closer, you'll see that things are changing. Opportunities are opening, threats are opening, things are moving. So that's the idea of the crack. And that if you want to affect change, not just by with dynamite or a sledgehammer, then what's required is to notice and work with the cracks. And it's one of the reasons this is such a delightful image is because it evokes lots of things. Somebody already noticed that it evokes the Leonard Cohen song. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. But of all the analogies that I came across, and many people are using this image of cracks, especially Bayo Okomalefe, who's written very beautifully about it. But probably the most accurate for what I'm trying to say is it's like the cracks. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the reference here. A rock climber ascends by using cracks or seams in the rock face for finger and toe holds. That if you're trying to climb a rock, you don't climb the rock as a whole. You climb it by finding where the cracks are and using them, or in that sense, working with them. And the opposite would be, and I've made a lot of emphasis in all of these habits of what it's not, because I find that sometimes a way of making it clearer. The opposite would be, oh my God, this is cracking, things are changing. I should ignore that or shy away from it. And the story I tell in the book is of a man who's well known in British Columbia, Canada, named Al Atmansky, who spent his whole life working on the systems that are producing uh, the status or the lie that are, what's the right word, that are the systems within which disabled people live in that part of the world. And what he's done has been very dramatic, and he's been doing it for decades, and lots have been written about it. And when I looked at the way he and others described what he had done, or what he and Vicky Kamak, his partner, did over these years, you could see that they were always looking for, where is there an opening? Where is something shifting that we can work with and use to create a systemic change? So yes, it is an evocative image, and it also uh, relates to the overall ideal of radical engagement, because it's about leaning forward to pay attention to the detail, not just saying, well, this whole thing ought to just change. So I think that's why it's a helpful metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving on to the next one, because I know people are dying to ask you the questions. Let's talk a little bit about experimenting a way forward.
Yeah. So I'll go through the other three more quickly, because I think that they're more familiar, at least from those of you who've seen my other books. And this is this drawing by Siobhan is of an octopus that is finding a new way to hunt, taking account of the litter on the seabed, in this case, a bottle. And so the idea of experimenting way forward, which I've written about a lot, is that rarely in systems transformation do we just think about what ought to be done and do it, and then that's done. Or rarely do we do that. Does that work so easily? More often, it's about learning through doing, not just thinking and then doing, trying things out. We're not sure will work, paying careful attention to the results, adjusting accordingly, not just doing what is familiar or safe. So many people have written about this, including me. And I guess the one point about it, which is worth emphasizing, is this can feel dangerous. If we're used to being experts, used to having the right answer before we start, used to justifying ourselves to funders with log frame models that this is what's going to happen, used to having our bosses presenting things that are bulletproof, that they won't get into trouble for and we won't get into trouble for. This sounds easy and obvious, but it's not. The next one.
The next one is the sixth habit that looks at collaborating with unlike others. And as you said, you've spoken about this and written about this quite a bit.
Yeah. So, Mpinane, that actually I'm presently a little bit of in a confused state, because I'm launching this book, but also rewriting a book called Collaborating with the Enemy. So I'm, which is about habit 6. And I'm working again with a book club, wonderful contributors, and they're placing doubt on this phrase "with unlike others," that this is the wrong framing. I think this is probably just needs to be called collaborating with others. But anyway, that's for the launch of the next. That question's for the launch of the next book. But just to say that Habit 6 is about collaborating
Mm.
across difference, collaborating not just with people who we like, who we think are like us, um, but collaborating with the people we need to collaborate with, including people we may not agree with or like or trust, because that's what's needed to do what we're trying to do. Um, and a lot of my work, a lot of Rios's work, is about what's possible when we can stretch to be able to, uh, yeah, work across boundaries. Let me just put it that way. And then the last one,
My favorite. I keep saying that.
yeah, you
Persevering
you have a
and
lot of favorites.
I have a lot of favorites. Persevering and resting kind of took me by surprise, Adam, because we're constantly challenged to move with speed and scale and, get to answering questions quickly. And I'm sure a lot of systems transformers themselves have done this to the detriment of their own personal well-being.
Yeah. So this is also one that um, I hadn't thought about much before, and uh, it's based on a very wonderful interview I did with the head of African American Studies at Yale, a man named Philip Solomon, who's really um, committed to doing system transforming work, especially around criminal justice, but also said in the interview that when he looked at his elders, the people who come before him, who had who had not followed this and had yeah had burnt out or died young, or he explains it in more detail than I am now, that he realized that this is for the long haul, and it's not just about sprinting for a while and then giving up, and it's not just about pushing until we burn out. So when I've spoken about this, uh, this the earlier version of this book in activist groups, this is the one that the most people say they find challenging. So in that sense, it's simple, but I think it's important to name it. And in the honeycomb, it's the one in the middle that allows us to be, yeah, to be healthy enough to be able to do what needs to be done, including healthy enough to see what we're not seeing, and to work with people that we find difficult to work with. That if system transformation was something that if we just gritted our teeth, we could be done with in a month or a year or a few years, that would be one thing. But it's not. And so this is not about persevering or resting. It's about persevering and resting for the long haul. So that's what this is about.
Hmm. Thank you, Adam. Nombulelo, you can take down the slides because I'm dying to ask Adam some of these existential questions that we're seeing come up in the chat. Maybe let's start with Greg's question. I'll read it to you, Adam. He says, "Hi, Adam. Many of us have been working on systems change for years or decades, only to witness the ongoing dominance of degenerative and extractive powers increasing division and degradation. In this context, why are regenerative change makers losing the battle of ideas? And why should we keep at it? What is systems change work in 2025 that addresses the context of this power struggle?" That's
Yeah.
quite an.
Well, thank you, Greg. I don't know which Greg this is, but thank you, whichever Greg it is. Um, I said that it's the afternoon or the evening now in South Africa where I am, and so I had a few hours before this, and I was thinking about this very question because, um, in a certain way, the books, the book and the work it represents is going against the tide, and I guess what I would say is two things. that we always have the option, if we wish, of fighting back, of fighting fire with fire, of fighting power with, of forcing, of fighting violence with violence. Um, that's not what this book is about. But I'm not, I'm not saying that you don't have that option. So it's been helpful for me recently to realize that what I'm trying to do in this book is to offer options, choices, to help people see what's possible so they can make their own choice about what they want to do, whether that is disengage, as I think was implied by your question, or give up, or rest for a while, or 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 fight, go to battle. Um, I'm not um, I'm not making a prescription. I'm trying to describe this method of radical engagement, this method of generative change. The second thing I'll say, which it's not obvious, well, it's not obvious how it fits into what I'm saying, but I think it's important, is even if that's what we choose, we still need to do all these things, or some version of all of these things. We still need to find allies, including ones that we don't agree with or like or trust. We still need to find the cracks and work with them. We still need to pay attention to what we're not seeing. We still need to ask ourselves, what do we think is responsible? We still need to not only look at others as actors or as parties, but as kin. We still need to persevere and rest. So, yes, I also think we're living in a difficult period, or certainly one that is surprising to me. I didn't expect that we'd be where we are, um, and yet I think this is relevant, nonetheless. Not as a prescription, but as a description of a, yeah, as Greg put it, of a regenerative uh, approach that engages with others as human beings. As for why this, as for why we're in the situation we're in, I don't think I have a better answer than I'm sure everybody on this call has ideas about this. I don't have any particular insight, um, but maybe, this seeing what we're not, what's unseen is important. That we, those of us who thought everything was, how can I put this simply? Those of us who thought we understood everything and we knew exactly what to do and how things were going and how to be successful. And many of us, certainly including me, have been surprised and disappointed. So perhaps seeing what's unseen to us would be a good start.
Well said. We have an anonymous question that says, when talking about systems change, often people fall into the trap of believing that systems need to change in the way they themselves think as the best, or otherwise the system is not changing in a, or otherwise the system is not changing in a good way. Does the book address how to deal with undoing these biases in the process of systems change on a daily basis?
Uh, yes. Uh, yes, I think this idea that um, I under I understand how things are and how things ought to be, and you all just should listen to me, and then we'd be fine. This book is offering a different approach. Why it talks. That's why the core idea is radical engagement, not radical telling people what to do. Radical dictating. That would be another book. Um, um, and again, I'll come back to what for me is a not a surprising habit, but I think an important one. This habit too, seeing what's unseen, seeing what we're not seeing. What are the practices? What are the habits that enable us? We may still have the same idea, but I'm not saying that we'll always change our mind. I still think that this is how things are, and this is how things ought to be. But at least we will be more aware of what else is going on and how other people are thinking about things and how to work with them, um, including and including how to work with people who we think are wrong, but nonetheless whom we think we need to work with, and this is something I came across more recently, not in the book, how to let other people think and be as they are, because if the condition is, in Thailand, my friend Sumit said to me, here we think collaborating means you agree with me. So starting with the idea that I'll work. I'm happy to do anything, work with anybody as long as they agree with me and admit I was right and they were wrong. It's just not a winning formula. Just not promising. At least doesn't work for me.
Me neither, Adam. There was a question earlier around the dimensions, and the question said, might the 3 dimensions also include identities?
Yeah, I think so. I have an identity as a part of a larger whole, as a team member or an actor, like an actor on a stage. I have an identity as a whole in myself, me, what I'm trying to do. And I have an identity as a relative. And I mean, maybe there's another dimension. I'm not saying these are the only dimensions, but I've found as I've played more and more with this, and as I said, this corresponds to the idea I've been working on for a long time and still working on about love, power, and justice, that paying attention to all 3 allows us to see more and act more fully. And the metaphor I use in the book is that you can try to just go in one dimension, but it's kind of hard to in physical space. It's hard to get around if all you can do is move in one dimension. But if you can move 3 dimensions, then you can get somewhere. And so that's the idea.
JJ in the chat has put a question that I find really interesting. Would we have seen earlier what we see today if we would have practiced habit 3 completely, or did we see it and shy away?
Sorry, I can't even remember what habit 3 is. Better look in the book. Somebody knows this better than me. Looking for what's unseen. Yes. Yes. I mean, hindsight, as they say, is 2020. But yes, I think so. I think the book is not saying that you can change yourself, change the world. That's not nearly that. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that system transformation is collective activity, but nonetheless, each of us have to do something. It's both, in that sense, it's both individual and collective. They're a Moebius strip, I think's the right word. But yes, I think to improve our own capacity to be effective change makers requires these habits. And yes, I find that often lots of people think there's just one way of looking at this. There's just one perspective. There's just one position. This is the way it is. The truth is. I used to have a colleague named Louis van der Merwe when I first moved to South Africa, and he had the very helpful advice. He said, if you find yourself pounding the table saying the truth is, just put at the beginning of the sentence, in my opinion. And if that doesn't work, try in my humble opinion. And it's a great reminder, just like I have an opinion about this, I feel very strongly about it, and it's my opinion. So it's that little bit of distance between me and my opinion is super helpful, and that is habit 3.
And Adam, Eduardo asks as a follow-up to that is, what is the process? What is the method? And that links to a question Antonio asked earlier, where he said, is there a methodology behind each habit or how to implement them? Or even how each of your books are interconnected and interweave with each other. This feels like the implementation based on the methods he's designed. Smiley face.
Well, um, so yes, there are some hints and exercises at the beginning of each of the, sorry, at the end of each of the chapters, um, about how to practice, how to make a small step to learn and practice and get better at and habitual at this habit. The books are connected. Uh, um, uh, just briefly, because I thought about this a little bit before, that my first book, Solving Problems, was about addressing problematic situations, and this book goes further, and it's explicitly about transforming systems. What I what I always wanted to do and did in the process of writing this book is look through the other end of the binoculars, not as in my books and as in many such books. How does what I do help the world, or why should everybody do what I'm doing? I decided to take the other look at it from the other angle, which is how do systems actually get transformed? So in that sense, it's not about a specific tool like transformative scenario planning or even facilitation. Um, um, and also, it's as I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to describe something more basic, not an occasional big activity, but a daily habit, and not something just for certain professionals, but for everybody who's trying to make a contribution. And the other thing I'll say is that although I've written a lot about power and love, I think, and this was the hint that Marcia Anderson gave me with all my relations, that that we need, as I've been trying to do for some years, to understand not just how we are parts of a larger whole, that's love, not just how we are wholes in ourselves, that's power, but the nature of our relationship with others, and that's and for which I give the shorthand of justice. So there is continuity with the other books, but the thing which I've never done before is to try to to address the question, what can each of us do every day? That's what this book is about.
Anna, Anna asks, in post-truth world, where parties do not believe each other's data or fact, where do you start?
I'm going to turn off this chat because you're saying so many interesting things that I'm tempted to read it, and so I'll read it afterwards. Thank you all for what I guess is a very rich conversation. Um, well, I think there's aspects of the current situation which are new and which are surprising and difficult. Um, that are encapsulated in the phrase "a post-truth world," and yet I've always, for all the time I've been doing this kind of work, which is more than 30 years, I've found that people have different understandings of what's going on, what the problem is, what the solution is. Um, um, and so that's not new. And usually everybody thinks they understand everything, and if everybody else would just see it the way I see it, then we'd be fine. So, so I guess I'd be careful not to overestimate, or I'd be careful not to be nostalgic about how easy this used to be and how much consensus there used to be. I think that's partly true and in many ways not true. And another aspect of this is the dysfunction of our current systems, or the way in which our current systems are working terribly for many people, was always, let me say, always more obvious to people for whom it was not working than it was for the people for whom it was working. And I would include myself in that latter category. So we there are aspects of our current situation which are new and surprising to me and very difficult, overwhelmingly difficult. And I'd caution against nostalgia. Um, um, and so there's a way in which all of my writing, including this book, are talking about, yeah, things that it's always been difficult to, it's always been difficult to work with people who we don't agree with or like or trust. Um, and some of the mechanisms we had for working that through are crumbling. So we need new mechanisms, and that's what books are about.
In habit 3, when you talk about the 3 dimensions, Felipe wants to know, why not all dimensions?
Yeah, you guys are trying to mess me up by changing the numbers all the time, right? Just to see if I can remember my own book. Yeah, habit 2, working on, yes. Yes. I'm referring here to the 3 dimensions I enumerate, the elements of a system, the behavior of the system as a whole, and the interrelation between the elements. But so that's what I mean by working in 3 dimensions, but feel free to work in more. The main point is not to work in just one. That's the crucial point.
We have about 8 minutes left of questions, but I do think that there's a question here by Elias Castritus. I'm so sorry. And she said, are there many means or daily practices to make these habits stick? And I know you've been thinking a little bit about not just with the exercises in the book, but you've been thinking about how to work with groups around the book and how to make some of these habits stick in a more practical way. Do you want to say a little bit about that as you answer this question?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Other ways
So
to make it stick?
are there means or daily practices to make these habits stick?
Yeah. Um, so there's a big literature on habits and how to develop them. I don't know that literature well. I don't go into that much. So what I'm doing in this book is um, pointing them out and offering some hints. But the whole area of how does one learn habits, and the other thing about this that my dear colleague Betty Sue Flowers pointed out to me as I was writing it is these are actually habits for breaking habits, habits for not acting habitually or reactively. Um, so so no, I don't I haven't covered that much.
Lynn says, Adam, following on to your earlier suggestion that it may be time to look for what's unseen, if we see current chaos as a tidal wave, bringing up what needs to be seen, and it will recede, how do we position ourselves to utilize the cracks or chasms it will reveal?
Lovely image, Lynn. Thank you.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Well, um, I think it's a great question, a great hint. I don't know the answer except don't run away. Pay attention, and pay attention particularly for the cracks that are revealed because they're there. I mean, now we're speaking generally. There's different cracks in different places, but I think that's a wonderful image and admonition. Right?
On cracks, Iris says, are cracks distinct from institutional contradictions or incongruence?
Well, I'm deliberately using a metaphor, cracks. So I think they would include incongruities or things that aren't working or things or dissatisfactions or the opposite, bright spots, uh, um, things that are working well. Um, it's all of that. Um, it's opportunities, it's openings, it's the great social innovation theorist Frances Wesley refers to them as doors. She's one of the people I quoted in the Al Atmansky story, and she says the thing about social innovators, they just know the doors are there. The doors are there for everybody, but they notice them more. So it's just drawing attention. All I'm trying to do in this chapter is draw attention to the fact that things are not as solid and immobile and fixed as we might believe. And so pay attention to where is there an opening? Where is there something we can work with? It's not as smooth and impenetrable and immovable as we might imagine. These systems were built by humans. They can be rebuilt by humans. So let's focus on that.
We have a lovely question by Morgan Downey, who says, how might habit 7 apply to systems and not only individuals? Habit 7 is persevering and resting.
Thank you. I was going to have to look it up again. How might it apply to? Yeah, right.
Systems and not individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, the book's finished. These are all lovely, lovely, very, I mean, it's great idea. Yes. Thank you.
So we have maybe room for one more question. And I really like this one by Mariana. She said, how to deal with the frustration of systems change. I'm talking about working hard, preparing, intervening, and making big efforts just to bump up into walls and end up questioning myself.
Yeah. Well, I once asked this, I was rereading Collaborating with the Enemy because I'm reworking it, and I came across something I'd written about an exchange with a man, a mentor to me, a man in India named Arun Mayra. And I'd forgotten about this particular anecdote, which is that I'd asked him this question, or some version of this question about, how to deal with things not turning out the way I wanted them to. And his comment, he's always chiding me. All of the quotes from Arun are about him chiding me. And he chided me. He said, "This is very egotistical. This is a very egotistical question, Adam. That it ought to, that it ought to turn out the way you think it ought to turn out." And he did then in that exchange refer me to the same section of the Bhagavad Gita that he's referred me to before, which is the end of chapter 2, where the famous phrase, "The work is yours, but not the fruits thereof." So yes, this is frustrating, complicated. It often doesn't work the way we want it to. Sometimes because we're wrong, our ideas aren't really very good, or sometimes we're right and they don't work, and all kinds of variations of that. But and we always have the option of bailing. This isn't, as I said, there's choices here. And I say right at the beginning of the book that you may conclude that you can't do anything to change these systems, and you should just protect yourself and your family and your organization. Uh, I'm not criticizing that choice at all. This is a book for people who've made a different choice, at least. So, yeah, it's a choice. But Arun's point is, if you're making the choice, the work is yours, but not the fruits thereof. So do what you think you can, act responsibly as you understand it, act, as skillfully as you can. But the results will almost certainly not be as you wish, and probably not in your lifetime. So if that's a requirement, which was what was implied when I asked that question to Arun, he said, well, you're likely to be disappointed with that expectation.
Adam, Tim had asked a question earlier about if you could say something about taking a trauma-informed approach to this methodology. I want to leave that question with you before I share with everyone what you're planning and where you'll be, and some exciting upcoming events that we can.
No, don't leave me with questions that are difficult for me to stew on while I'm trying to listen to you. I don't. I think it's a good question. I think it's important. The way systems are now is hurting a lot of people, and is traumatic for a lot of people, and that's part of the reality of the situation, and has to be taken account of. I wouldn't say I'm especially knowledgeable or skilled at that. There's other people in Rios who are more advanced than I am in that. Other people in Rios, outside of Rios. But yes, the whole challenge of this work is to see what's going on and to make wise choices. And if you ignore big things like trauma, like power differences, like oppression, like all kinds of other things that are going on, then you won't make good choices and you won't be effective. So, or you won't be effective in a generative way. So, don't leave me with questions to think about, Mpinane.
Tim, I hope that that was in some way satisfying. This time has flown, and I want Adam, first of all, to thank you for your time and for your wisdom and for sharing what you've learned along the way from others and through your own experiences. I think this has been a really valuable conversation, and I really, really hope that, and I imagine that it's really encourage people to buy the book from the 8th of April. The book will be available, but it is already available for pre-order if you'd like to order it already. Adam is going to be also running some in-person book launches, Johannesburg in April at Gibbs, and then from Thursday, the 8th of May, up until the 23rd of May, Adam will be all over Europe, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, France, launching the book. And then he will be going home to Canada, where he'll kick off his North America tour with in Montreal. There's also lots of opportunity, and I think Adam would really welcome if you all got in touch, if you want him. I've seen some comments in the chat already, excited to invite Adam to talk about this book, different forums and with different audiences, and I think we're very excited about that as well. If you go to the next slide, Nombulelo. Adam is also going to be running a super user group. So you heard him talk about the book creating club, and we're excited that in June we will be kicking off a super user group. So people who want to come together and work through the book, and Adam talked about these sections at the back of the book where you can actually have an opportunity to put these ideas into action. So join the study and practice sessions. Adam will be offering 3 of them. Teams of 12 will be invited. Please read the book before starting with the study group. And all of these links will be available in our post-webinar communication, so you'll be able to learn more about that. Next slide. This is where you can pre-order the book, but you can also use the Rios Partners website, where we're really excited to able to support the launch of this book and to amplify the message. Next slide. Connect with us. For those of you who do not follow Adam on social media, please do. We are also available Rios partners on social media. We've got newsletters where you get to see and learn from a lot of the other Rios partners community. And we're excited to share and learn from you all. And I am so sorry that we did not get to all the questions, but I imagine there's going to be lots more coming from Adam, and we'll be able to engage with him on these ever existing questions. Thank you, everyone. Any final words, Adam?
Thank you, sister.
Thank you, brother. Bye-bye, everyone.